There were thousands of evil SS members who worked as guards inside of the concentration camps during the Second World War, but only a small number were ever executed for their horrific crimes. They were involved on a daily basis in the mass murder and brutality of camps such as Dachau, Buchenwald and Bergen-Belsen, and these guards would willingly execute prisoners in the open to inspire fear. But at the end of the war, a number of former guards of Dachau concentration camp were brought to trial, and the majority of those who were brought in front of the American-controlled courtroom were sentenced to death for their evil at the camp. The Americans, when they liberated Dachau, were disgusted by what they found, and they wanted quick and harsh reprisals and punishments for those guards who worked there. But one guard who would be executed by the Americans at Landsberg Prison was Vinzenz Schöttl, who was an ardent Nazi who had worked at a number of concentration camps. He rose to a very high-ranking position, and he would even become the commandant and director of one part of Auschwitz. Join us today as we look at his story and execution, and as always, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Vinzenz Schöttl was born on the 30th of June 1905 in Appersdorf in Bavaria, and it's assumed that he had a rather normal early life and upbringing. In 1928 he would get married, and he and his wife had 5 children, and for work he would work inside of an office as a cashier or a small-scale accountant. But Vinzenz Schöttl then became, very early on, interested in the politics of the Nazi Party and Adolf Hitler, and he would join up very early in 1928, but he officially became a fully paid-up member of the Nazi Party on the 1st of February 1931. It's believed that he had attended many rallies, and he would have seen Hitler speak, and his local area was literally where the Nazis were seeking to take control of during the Munich Putsch, and it was considered the heartland of the Third Reich where they began. But also he would join the SS, Heinrich Himmler's later paramilitary group, which was at this time rather small, and no one at the time would have imagined what a brutal and barbaric force they would become, as they were the ones who were involved in the running of the concentration camps, and the slaughter that would happen there within the barbed wire fences every single day. But on the 30th of January 1933, Vinzenz Schöttl then was recruited to go and work inside the first Nazi concentration camp that was opened, Dachau. Dachau would become a huge complex as the Nazi stranglehold over Germany ramped up, and it would become incredibly deadly. It was a site which was synonymous with torture and execution, with terrifying torture chambers such as the standing cells found there, and many people were executed by hanging or by gunshots within Dachau or close by. Throughout its time in operation, there were at least 41,500 people killed inside of Dachau, with its estimated 188,000 people passing through the barbed wire fences. The prisoners of the camp would live in constant fear that their lives were coming to an end, and people would be hanged from trees and would be flogged in front of others. Disease was also rife at Dachau, as was ill treatment by the guards who would hit and beat prisoners, often resulting in them being seriously injured and even killed. Inside of Dachau, Schöttl would work with Martin Weiss, another guard who also became rather senior, and the pair would work together many times throughout their careers. But whilst at Dachau, Schöttl was known for being involved in the terrible mistreatment of prisoners. But after staying at Dachau around 4 years, he was headhunted by the SS to go and work at a different site. This was known as Herzog-Salzmüller, and this was a small concentration camp which was strictly used for travellers. Schöttl was employed as a house manager, and he would be responsible for those inmates and their behaviour, and inside this house people were brutally beaten and they were then executed. Those who were regarded by the Nazis as asocial were sent there, and they would then be executed. Following his time at this site, he was promoted in September 1938 to the rank of Untersturmführer, and he would then be drafted to go and work following the outbreak of the Second World War in Lublin, and to work inside the Lublin Ghetto. The Nazis wanted to punish the Polish population, and Schöttl to begin with worked as a train driver for the news department of the SS, and he would ferry different members of the group around. But then, looking for something more brutal, he from June 1940 became a guard soldier of the Lublin Ghetto. His letters from this time would show his true beliefs about the Nazi ideology, and his feelings towards the Polish population. He wrote, "The Polish population looks quite neglected. I have already asked what happens to the Polish beggars, antisocials, etc. They are all used in Germany," alluding to the fact they were killed. He would also write weeks later, "Here it is to the devil, the dark and degenerate faces of the Poles. Sloppy and dirty Jews meet you at every turn. In the ghetto it looks bleak, all rubble and ashes. It should be difficult to build a hiking yard here in Poland. Every Pole who has no work so far would have to register and then come to Germany. This crooked human material, while sitting around on the street, is so depraved that it disgusts you directly when you look at it. Then this gang is not to be trusted either. We always have to go to the street as a couple, so that nothing can happen to anyone so easily. Following this, Vinzenz Schöttl then went to work back inside of the concentration camps, this time at Neuengamme. Inside of this camp, 42,900 people of the 106 that were held were killed at the brutal site. Every prisoner at the camp was starving, and most died within 3 weeks of getting to the camp. Every prisoner at the camp was starving, and most died within 3 months of getting to the camp, and the portions available were not good enough to sustain human life. Dysentery was also very common, and this killed thousands, and life at the camp was a struggle every single day. The Nazis clearly wanted the prisoners to die through labour and working, and the medical situation was incredibly poor. There was a gas chamber there, and Schöttl would work here under Martin Weiss, his close ally. He wrote whilst at the camp, "The task that is given to me here is anything but easy. I much prefer to be a carer. While you go through thick and thin with the leader, and no task must be too difficult for you, until we finally attach a victory to our flag." And with this he showed he would do anything Hitler and Himmler ordered. He would also write, "A lousy task that we got. Here you sit half in the prison, half in the grave. I never want to go to a concentration camp again in my life." Following some time at Neuengamme, he was then transferred to be a camp leader of Auschwitz III Monowitz and the Pacific Buna Werke site in 1944. Monowitz was the IG Farben chemical plant inside of Auschwitz's complex, where workers and prisoners would conduct back-breaking work each day, which was very dangerous, and it was a slave labour site. He was the director of the site, showing how senior he was, but then as time went on he would be moved from Monowitz to go and work as a deputy commandant under Otto Fürchner of the Kaufering concentration camp, which was a sub-camp yet again of Dachau. He stayed here until later in the war, when the camp was evacuated, but he would then, following the end of the conflict, be arrested by the American army. He was brought to the first Dachau Trials, which were overseen by the Americans, at the very camp where he had exhibited brutality over prisoners, and Vinzenz Schöttl was charged with the crimes he had committed there, and also within the subcamps. He claimed to the courtroom that he had been only carrying out orders that were given to him by a superior officer, and that he would have faced death himself if he hadn't have done this. But regardless of this, the American courtroom found him guilty, and along with the last commandant Martin Weiss, Vinzenz Schöttl was sentenced to death. He was imprisoned at Landsberg Prison for a number of months, and he would then on the 28th of May 1946 be executed for his crimes inside of Dachau and other camps. He was kept in his cell until the moment of his execution came, and inside of the courtyard of Landsberg Prison was a gallows structure which would take the lives of many Nazi war criminals. Schöttl was led from his cell, and he was accompanied by a priest who would hear his last words, and also many military policemen who would chaperone him up to the gallows. He walked up the stairs of the gallows and was then greeted by the executioner, who, following his identity being confirmed, prepared him for his execution. The black cap was placed over his head, and then the noose was too, and with this final checks were made, and the executioner released a trapdoor, and within minutes Vinzenz Schöttl was executed and killed. Vinzenz Schöttl was an experienced SS guard who worked at many different concentration camps, and he became in charge of part of Auschwitz. He was a man who was known for his brutality, and he would carry out beatings regularly of the inmates, but at the end of the Second World War he was condemned for his involvement in the concentration camps. Inside the same prison that Hitler was held decades before, Schöttl was executed on a gallows, along with many other former guards of Dachau. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.